Thanks, Richard. Very kind of you to say. So I'm Eugene Minogue, Executive Director at Play England, former child and now big kid. So I'm going to do a bit more scene setting and build on the fantastic presentation from Ingrid, really, and talk about the importance of play, build on the levelling up inquiry, and hopefully present some of the answers around what's potentially next. But before I do that, I want to bring the voice of the child into the room to tell you a little bit about Play England and how important it is to listen to children and young people.
Play is an essential childhood ingredient, which impacts on all areas of development. Play is vital for children, families and communities. It's the main way they enjoy their daily lives, make friends and enjoy the world around them. Outdoor play is essential and should be actively encouraged in all households. However, children are experiencing many barriers to play, including traffic, crime, time spent on screens, social segregation and the busy structured lives of families. As children's opportunities for play have reduced, there has been a growth in childhood obesity, mental health problems, excessive use of screens, social media, and other child-related issues. The pandemic has had an extremely negative impact on children's play and on the play sector, and also has created a legacy of anxiety and loneliness for children. Play England is a national charity whose primary purpose is to campaign for and support the development of quality play provision, playful environments and play-conducive policies in England. Play England's vision is for England to be a child-friendly country where all children and young people are free to play. There are many ways to get involved, and we need your support to make positive change. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and find out about our campaigns on our website.
Okay, so to build on the presentation earlier from Ingrid, I'm going to take you through some scene setting, some context around the vital importance of play, which I'm all sure you're aware of. But today we're going to focus on the active element of play. So play is the foundation of all human movement, whether that be physical literacy, physical activity, PE, sport, fitness, exercise, whatever you want to call it or whatever label you'd like to stick on it. As we saw in the video, it's vital for children and young people. It's the main way they enjoy their daily lives and make friends and interact, both socially, physically, but also how they develop their cognitive and creative and cultural skills and awareness, but also their resilience. It's how they learn to manage risks and engage with risks and benefit from risks, how they make decisions and develop their identities. As we've seen in some of the slides already from Ingrid, and as we'll see as we go through others, children will play whenever and wherever they have the opportunity to do so. Play is fundamentally different than adult-led activities such as sport. We need to give children the time, opportunity to play, to follow their own instincts, their ideas and interests in their own way. Play is essential for happy, healthy, capable and resilient children. It brings people together, communities, families, and society. So spaces and places for play and recreation enable safe and stimulating interactions between all sorts of different elements of society, whether that be in the built or the natural environment. The social aspects of play and recreation are fundamental for relationships and building that with people and the environment. Nature-based play is now something that we need to lean into, obviously with the climate crisis. And degreying our public spaces helps create more resilient environments and new open spaces that are diverse for all of our people, not just children, but their families and their caregivers. Child-friendly play spaces are also good for business and good for economic value and long-term viability of the built environment. And retail are starting to understand this. If you go to a big shopping centre or one of the discount stores or a leisure complex, you'll see that they're building in play as a fundamental part of the offering that they have. So just to build on what Ingrid spoke about with the Levelling Up inquiry, so towards the end of 2023, some organisations lobbied for that, and much to all of our surprise, we secured it. So since then, there's been various sort of evidence, both oral and written submissions that have been taking place to gather evidence around how planning and building within the urban environment can better present opportunities for children and young people's health and well-being. There's lots of different elements to the inquiry, and I would encourage people to go and have a look, and you'll see on some of the slides there's some QR codes which you can scan with your phones, which will take you straight through to some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. But children and young people are virtually absent within our built environment in terms of how it's designed, who it's designed by, how it's built and where it's built. And that's something that the inquiry has been looking at in detail. So Play England, along with over 100 other organisations and individuals, submitted evidence. That bank of evidence is an absolute treasure trove and gold mine of information around what could and should be done, but also it is a stark realisation of how poor we are, particularly in England, when it comes to recognising children and young people within the urban environment. As set out in our submission to the Levelling Up inquiry, leadership is desperately needed. The government, local authorities and civil society can together make sure that children, young people and families, as well as wider society, benefit from play and recreation opportunities. Whilst we're pleased to see that the government are engaging with these issues, we need to make sure that there is meaningful action. We look forward to seeing the final report and the recommendations, which is due sometime later this spring, early summer. But ultimately, it's incumbent on all of us to drive that change and move it forwards. And hopefully that's what I'm going to present some of the answers to this difficult question. Unfortunately, this clip won't play on the platform, but this is the Housing Minister, Lee Rowley MP, who was the only minister to turn up at the inquiry. To say that his evidence was disappointing would be an understatement. The only piece of information that came out of that was of any use was the acknowledgement that they need to move away from the no ball games culture. Apart from that, it was pretty much a defence of where government is. To put that into context as well, there was no engagement from the Department of Education throughout the process, and there's been an exchange of letters this week between the Select Committee and the DFE. So it shows you how disjointed government is when it comes to children and young people, and not just the built environment, but just generally. So what do we need? So following our submission to the Levelling Up inquiry, we launched our manifesto ask on the 1st of February. It was part of a wider landmark document which brought together 29 cross-sector organisations covering play right through to elite sport. It was coordinated by Andy Reid, who was an ex-MP, and it includes a foreword by Kim Ledbetter. If you'd like to read our manifesto ask, you can scan the QR code on screen and it'll take you straight through to it. We're in prime place with chapter number 1, as it rightly should be when we're talking about children and young people, and play being the foundation of all human movement. The context of our manifesto ask is a clear, no-cost policy ask. So what we're asking for is for play sufficiency legislation to be introduced in England. So play sufficiency legislation would establish a statutory duty on local authorities to make sure that they comply with and assess and secure sufficient opportunities for play and recreation in the same way that they do for other elements such as sport and physical activity. Again, if you want to learn more about our manifesto ask, there is a QR code there which will take you through to a podcast where there's a bit of a deep dive into some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about some of the headlines within it. Additionally, our manifesto ask has been supported and echoed by the Youth Sport Trust. Their headline within their manifesto is 60 active minutes a day through PE, sport and play. So again, we're influencing wider stakeholders and others to re-engage or re-socially norm play within society. So a bit more context on play sufficiency. A similar duty has been in place in Wales for well over a decade, and Scotland have recently introduced in that, leaving England lagging behind. Additionally, Save the Children published a report in September 23 off the back of the pandemic. As you can see, there's 3 sort of key highlights within there. 2 of the key highlights is one is a national play strategy, which I'll come on to, and also calling for play sufficiency duty for local authorities. So we are not the only ones calling for this. So a bit more detail for those of you that are not too au fait with the National Planning Policy Framework, or the NPPF, which is the overarching planning Bible, if you like, for England. It is very weak in terms of regards to children and young people, specifically play and recreation opportunities. There's only one mention of children currently within the NPPF. There's no other departmental guidance from DLUC or others which addresses children explicitly. By contrast, bats and newts are specifically covered within that. So some of you may have heard last summer, Boris Johnson, swimming pool plans got thwarted by great crested newts, but we don't have any sort of equivalent for children and young people. Sitting below the NPPF, each local authority is required to have, in England, is required to have a local plan. Within that development of the local plan, it goes through a very stringent process. There are statutory consultees such as Sport England, which will protect things like playing pitches, tracks, courts, wickets, a whole range of different things, as well as indoor built facilities such as leisure centres and swimming pools. But currently play and recreation falls squarely between the cracks. Currently there's no body to speak for them. That's what Play England would like to change through play sufficiency legislation. So whilst that's the headline, there are some details that sit below it. There's 3 key elements of play sufficiency legislation that we'd like to see introduced. So we wanted to build on the good work that Wales and Scotland have done, but also broaden the breadth, particularly in England. And there's a huge opportunity to do that. So when we talk about spaces and places for play and recreation, about the workforce, and then bringing both of those 2 elements together through high quality, inclusive provision. So we want to work with Sport England in their current capacity as statutory consultee on the planning process. We're not asking for Play England or another body to pick up that mantle. We feel that Sport England can expand their current remit to pick up play and recreation in the same way that they do for sport and physical activity, and build on their P12 planning principles, which are currently around sport and physical activity, but build that out to cover play and recreation. And we want to replace the current 6-acre standard, which is around laps, leaps and neeps, to make sure it's underpinned by legislation within the NPPF. So some of the stuff that Ingrid has spoke about, we want to bring back the good old plays on our streets, neighbours, communities and parks, making sure that we build on the principle of benefit risk assessment, but also we do that through child-centred design and co-design with children and bring the voice of the child into the planning system. We want to address inequalities such as teenage girls, but also making sure that any facilities or spaces or places that are provided are genuinely inclusive and not just accessible. We want to ensure spaces and places for play and recreation are appropriately and robustly inspected and maintained, and making sure that it's on a statutory footing. So moving on to workforce, we want to align with the government's Get Active strategy and build out and re-establish play workers as a visible, highly committed, competent workforce in our schools, communities and playgrounds. We want to bring in a regulation framework to make sure that we have workforce registration in the same way as what is coming for sport and physical activity. And then combining spaces and places and workforce together is around high quality, inclusive provision. So making sure that there's sufficient time and space, particularly across the day, before, during and after school. Certainly as I used to as a child in the 80s, being able to play before, during and after school time. Making sure that our school staff, teachers, lunchtime supervisors have adequate training to facilitate and enable play, and then start to build on wider things within the curriculum, whether that be physical literacy, physical activity, PE and school sport, and more broadly, addressing children's social, physical and mental well-being. Play should become the focus of after-school clubs, as it used to be. We've been sportising our children far too quickly, far too early, for too long. We need to get back to putting play at the very heart of the movement of our children. We need to ensure a greater understanding of the importance of play and recreation, and making sure that is visible in all aspects of society. As I mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a shameful position whereby we have to socially re-normalise play. So what we're doing, we're trying to put ourselves in a state of preparedness, and this links back to the Save the Children report and also what we're doing as an organisation. So following our submission to the Levelling Up inquiry and our manifesto ask, we're now starting to strategically re-imagineer Play England. Primarily that's through the development, engagement and consultation and adoption of a new 10-year strategy. At the heart of the strategy will be the call for play sufficiency legislation, but also the UNCRC, or the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of the Child, particularly, but not exclusively, Article 31. We would then look to adopt our strategy later this year or in early 2025, and we're currently undertaking various sort of consultation exercises with various stakeholders and partners to shape that. So thank you.
Thanks very much.